The machine that has run so mercilessly for 4 years is at last brought to a stop. Now begins the task of rebuilding, mending, repairing. The scarred buildings can be rebuilt. The war-torn fields can be sown again. But the men, they can never be made the same.
In the aftermath of the First World War, the Australian government offered a settlement scheme in Western Australia for returning servicemen. Yet limited arable land meant that 5,000 returned servicemen were reduced to the most marginal areas, where they engaged in a mixed farming of mostly wheat and wool. It was a difficult life. However, a good string of harvests in the 1920s left many optimistic for the decade to come. When the Great Depression struck, the price of many Australian commodities plummeted, especially wheat. The Prime Minister James Scullin attempted to overcome the disaster by increasing the farmers' acreage of wheat fields and encouraged farmers by offering a guaranteed price of 4 shillings per bushel. However, the federal government could not hold their end of the bargain, and the Parliament could not agree on a guaranteed price of wheat. As wheat farmers watched the price of wheat continue to fall, they decided enough was enough. As the harvest of 1932 loomed, desperate farmers went on strike and refused to load or harvest their grain. A showdown was inevitable. However, it came with an unexpected enemy. Emus are Australia's native flightless bird, and they look more dinosaur than avian. A long-necked, shaggy-coated creature, emus grow up to 1.9 meters tall and can run up to 50 kilometers an hour. A migrating mob of emus, numbering roughly 20,000, stumbled across the farmers' unharvested wheat fields, extending into their natural habitat, which provided ample food and water in an otherwise desolate terrain. The emus began eating and trampling the crops, with the farmers unable to repel them. The prospect of losing a harvest was devastating, and the soldier settlers turned to the one thing they knew: war.
These are some of the unfortunate farmers whose wheat crops have been trampled down by hordes of emus, but they're hopeful of getting rid of the pest at last.
Upon the farmers' request, the Minister for Defense, Sir George Pierce, authorized a small military force led by Major G.P.W. Meredith to quell the emus. Meredith and his forces were given 2 Lewis machine guns and 10,000 rounds of ammunition, and were sent out to assist the farmers. Thus, the Emu War had begun. Meredith and his men quickly learned that approaching the mob of emus in open terrain meant they quickly scattered and were impossible to shoot. It became clear that the most effective strategy would be ambush attacks, especially around scattered water resources. Regardless of their tactics, the army force was comically ineffective by all metrics. Even Meredith conceded, if we had a military division with the bullet-carrying capacity of these birds, it would face any army in the world. As the press covered these skirmishes, they only praised the birds for their organization and tactical abilities, and questioned whether the war was the most effective or ethical solution to deal with the emu problem. The Prime Minister eventually had to answer for the farce in Western Australia, with the opposition party politicians jokingly arguing that medals should be awarded to the emus who had won every round so far. Meredith and his task force ultimately persisted in ambush after ambush until they were recalled on the 15th of December. In his final report, Meredith claimed that 9,860 bullets had killed 986 emus, and that another 2,500 had succumbed to their wounds, figures which historians argue are likely overcounted and falsified. Historian Johnson Murray even argues that in all likelihood, opening fire on the emus only exacerbated damage and caused a greater trampling of crops in the region. This unique military experiment was not one that the government wanted to repeat. Despite the farmers' request that the defense minister continue operations in the region, their requests were denied. Instead, the government created a bounty system where the farmers could be financially reimbursed for every emu they killed, which proved more effective than any military solution. Between 1945 and 1960, 284,700 emus were killed by farmers. However, in the grand scheme of things, this didn't solve the farmers' economic plight, as many continued migrating into the cities, leaving their settlements, looking for higher-paying work. So what happened to the emus? Australia's emu population recovered and is currently stable after receiving revised conservation status in 1999. However, they still face similar issues of habitat encroachment and destruction, and the frequency of human interaction is only growing. While the Great Emu War of 1932 remains a strange footnote in Australian history, it still remains important to this day to find more sustainable and ethical methods for Australians and their government to coexist with their rich native fauna.
Family will have grown a bit since Dad got put in jail. Sister, the wallaby stew, make soup of the kangaroo.